Hello everybody, this is Brandon Korash, and this is my presentation on cybersecurity in the world today, looking at the United States and Japan as case studies. Whereas hitherto World War I warfare was limited to land, sea, and air, come the Second World War and the Cold War, new domains of strategic advantage announced themselves: outer space and cyberspace. Concerning the latter, though intangible in nature, its acquisition and defense has become just as pertinent to national security and its critical infrastructures. As it stands, cyberspace offers a new frontier for would-be political actors and cyber mercenaries, a sort of wild west of private and public players working either under the auspices and interests of nation-states or themselves, with ramifications ranging from the micro to the macro. Because the private sector provides much of the frameworks in which these critical sectors are housed, the need for partnerships between governmental organizations across nations and sectors is high. The U.S. government's reach only extends over a small region of the digital environment. With the situation as it is and was, the U.S. has issued and updated numerous statutes aimed at regulating the digital landscape and preventing breaches of personal, private, and state information by third parties. The latest of these statutes is the Cybersecurity Act of 2015, also known as the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act of 2015, and it was met with some controversy, both from its initial passing, its broad and ambiguous definitions in regards to what constitutes cybersecurity, and the threats found therein. But before we tackle this, it pays to provide a brief history of reform in the United States. The history of cybersecurity information sharing legislation begins with the Clinton administration, with their January 2000 National Plan for Information Systems Protection. Following 9/11, the Bush administration implemented the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, which would later play a pivotal role in the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act. 2 years later, in February, the National Strategy to Secure Cyberspace was published, and where the groundwork for the voluntary disclosure of cyber threats was laid. The bill sought to address questions of liability within the disclosure of said information and incentivize the process. Following this, the Obama administration kept the focus on public-private sharing with the May 2009 Cyberspace Policy Review and the Comprehensive National Cybersecurity Initiative, in both of which the need for partnerships and coalitions protected under the law was emphasized. However, as with the statutes and legislation that preceded this, the private sector still held some reserves against the release of sensitive information because of harm to their reputations and antitrust concerns. In conjunction with these initiatives was the Executive Order 13636, which also sought to incentivize voluntary participation in the sharing of cybersecurity information. It is at this time that Congress started tackling the issue again and started laying the foundation for what would eventually become the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act. From then until its implementation, pushback was felt from lawmakers, privacy and tech groups, and the president himself, who held reservations over the proposed bill's failure to protect citizens' privacy. In the end, after several different incarnations, the bill was passed as a last-minute must-pass as a part of the Appropriations Act. While no one disagrees with the need for such legislation, as it stands, the negatives seem to outweigh the positives of the bill, especially in terms of privacy and incentivizing the sharing of cybersecurity-related threats. The goal of this bill is to provide the incentive and legal framework for said sharing. However, the language used in defining the 18 key terms allows for surveillance hitherto required by probable cause and/or warrants. Whether this was the intention of the bill or not, it is a fact that we must still contend with. A failure to clearly outline the removal of PII, personally identifiable information, ties into this, as does the fact that the Department of Homeland Security is not liable for a failure to remove said information across its channels. As is, many senators are of the opinion that privacy is being treated as an afterthought when it should be first and foremost in our minds. A key phrase in a lot of the literature is that this bill is a good first step, a way to address the need for partnerships and coalitions. However, previous legislature has already covered this, and much still needs to be done by way of privacy and the use of collected information by other channels apart from cybersecurity. Senator Collins was of such an opinion, stating that the bill is insufficient in regards to protecting the critical infrastructure of the American people who rely upon this infrastructure for their safety, health, and economic well-being. Senator Collins goes on to propose a two-tier system which pays to dive into. The first tier, covered under the bill, voluntary disclosure, they believe should be strengthened to protect citizens. In regards to the second tier, Senator Collins makes the claim that there should be a mandatory disclosure for those in the business of providing the software and hardware for critical infrastructure. Senator Ron Wyden also provides us with some enlightening testimony, addressing the failure of the bill to provide redress in cases where the government violates the rules established by this act. Indeed, many officials are of the opinion that this bill in actuality does little to increase the sharing of cybersecurity threats, and more by way of collecting information on U.S. citizens. Moreover, as alluded to, by way of privacy, the bill condones the collection of huge swaths of information and liability protection for those who provide the information, whether or not it's correct. Tied to this is the fact that this data need not abide by laws of public records. In other words, there is no public oversight or notification system for falsely identified victims. Moreover, information gathered can be appropriated in places that extend beyond the reach of cybersecurity by federal government employees wishing to use said information in crimes ranging from identity theft to homicide. While the U.S. is taking robust and holistic steps to ensure cooperation between the private and public sectors, the question still remains at what cost. Edward Snowden's leaking of the NSA surveillance policy on citizens across the globe was a wake-up call in this respect. Much of the controversy surrounding this new bill arises from the fact that this might just be another veiled surveillance program, one that grants the U.S. government and its state and local officials a sort of get-out-of-jail-free card, so to speak, when it comes to surveillance. Now, towing the line between preemptive strategies in such a way that allows for protection of citizens' sensitive information and secures against attacks and provides corporations with proper liability clauses is a difficult feat. The passage of the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act is a good forward step in securing and encouraging private and public cooperation in the defense against malicious cyber attackers. However, much still needs to be done by way of ensuring trust vis-a-vis liability when sharing information between the private, public, and governmental sectors, all the while keeping citizens' privacy at the forefront. Much like the U.S., Japan has recognized the need to prioritize cybersecurity and private-public partnerships as it relates to critical infrastructure. Since they have started focusing on cybersecurity policy, Japan has sought to define a clear concept of what constitutes cybersecurity, as well as understanding that the compromise of this intangible domain can have very real-world ramifications. During this evolution, Japan has shifted focus from a countermeasure approach, see the Fundamental Act on Cybersecurity, to proactive approaches, see the Cybersecurity Strategy, and has strengthened the power of government to combat and prevent attacks by establishing a cybersecurity strategy headquarters, which works under the auspices of the Cabinet Secretariat. Moreover, they have adapted and expanded on the National Center of Incident Readiness and Strategy for Cybersecurity. As a national policy, cybersecurity has become prioritized, as has global approaches to safeguarding and protecting against attacks. Following the data breach of the Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, which resulted in the theft of trade secrets, the National Information Center was launched under the direction of the Cabinet Office in April of 2005. Following this, a publication by the Ministry of Defense has added cyberspace to the Self-Defense Forces mechanism, along with air, sea, and land. This happened at the end of March 2014. Their cybersecurity strategy focuses on three main points. One being resilient cyberspace that ensures protection and recovery among all stakeholders. Two being a rigorous cyberspace to strengthen creativity and knowledge through developing technology, capacity building, and increasing public literacy. And three being a world-leading cyberspace to strengthen the ability of contribution and outreach through diplomacy, global outreach, and international cooperation. Alongside all of this, critical infrastructure industries interact with the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Partnership of Japan, also known as JCIP, which takes initiative for cybersecurity information sharing partnerships between the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology, Culture and Sports, and the private sector. The Information Technology Promotion Agency operates this cybersecurity partnership in the same way that the DHS and its voluntary members function. Additionally, Japan's Computer Security Incident Response Team works on detection, triage, and response. Their national policy agency has sought to come up to speed with their cybersecurity. However, there are still some limitations. Article 21 of the Japanese Constitution and Article 4 of the Telecommunications Business Act limit the implementation of laws that clearly define the collection and analysis of communication records by the Japanese government. Moving forward, Japan stresses the need for solidifying this legal framework, strengthening their infrastructures already in place on all fronts, and through international coalitions, all the while, like the U.S., juggling concerns of privacy. In regards to international coalitions and partnerships, regular conference is held between Japan, the USA, the UK, India, the EU, and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Speaking specifically to the Japan-US relations, through the Japan-US Cyber Dialogue and the Policy Cooperation Dialogue on the Internet Economy, this collaboration is being fostered as well.